Hello everyone, and thanks for coming back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the Happy Model Mobula 6 HD, which has the RunCam Split 3 Lite, new Happy Model motors 0802 19,000 kV, 31mm Gem Fan tri-blade props. The all-in-one board is the Crazy Bee F4 Lite flight controller and ESC, which has a built-in VTX. The 4-in-1 ESC on here is rated for 5 amps, 6 amp peak for 3 seconds, solid pin PH20 connector. I added a loom band, this rubber band, to help keep the battery in. Motor poster, I'm getting 65 millimeters. Mine weighs 27.6 grams. It comes with 4 250 milliamp 1S batteries. With the included batteries, it brings our weight to 34.5 grams. I also flew it on this TinyWhoop and G&B battery. With the 350 milliamp G&B battery, it weighs just over 36 grams. With the TinyWhoop 333 milliamp battery, it weighs just a touch over 36 grams. Just for clarity, the stock battery weighs 6.7 grams, the G&B 8.5 grams, and in the TinyWhoop battery, a little less than 8.5 grams. Other than the included batteries, it also comes with extra props, a screwdriver, some extra screws, and a prop remover, and a USB charger. So during this special time, getting inside flights during the daytime has been a challenge. Both Mom and I are working from home. We've got our 3 kids. They're doing schoolwork still, various other things going on, so I have had to wait until everybody goes to bed in order to be able to fly it around. And I've got that audio recording, as I always do, on the table so that you can hear the sound. Now the first thing is, and I try to qualify these things all the time when I'm doing reviews, is that whenever you add weight, in this case we're adding weight because HD, we're deciding that HD is more important than performance. If you want performance and you want a 65mm footprint, there are options out there like the Happy Model Mobula 6, like the Meteor 65. Those are going to outperform this in just pure performance, but this one has HD. And HD in this case I think is really, really good, but we'll talk more about that as we get deeper in the video. Speaking of the video, what we're going to find is this flight is going to be about 2 minutes and 20 seconds. This is on the stock battery. I have been asked how I keep track of flights and batteries. I write it on a piece of paper and then I see it in the DVR, and so I can always clarify that when I'm doing the video editing on which battery I am flying. On the G&B and the TinyWhoop batteries, it was really difficult. If you just look at the flight, it was difficult to tell the difference between the two. I think the TinyWhoop battery outperforms the G&B ever so slightly. It could be the fact that my G&B batteries have a lot more flights on them. That's possible. I only have 10 of the TinyWhoop batteries, and they are generally more expensive. But I'll put links down in the video description down, below to where you can purchase the G&B and the TinyWhoop batteries. You may want to consider going back to the stock 300 because, of course, when you add additional weight, that makes flying, I don't want to say more challenging, but it changes things a little bit. So that's the best way I can quantify that. In this video, we're going to take a look at a lot of video footage. I tend to try to give you more video footage so you can make a diagnosis of whether you like something or whether it's for you or not. And we'll have the inside flight, which we're looking at. We'll also take a look at a little more of a try to slow cruise in the house a little bit. So with the HD footage, you can take a closer look at that again. It's at nighttime inside. And then we'll take a look at the FPV View, which I think is improved in the RunCam Split 3 Lite. And we'll then go outside and we'll fly it. And then we'll take a look at the FPV View outside. And then we'll have some crashes as we finish up any discussion that I wasn't able to complete during the flight portion of the video. In our cruising flight, I'm going to do more close proximity, and you're going to see me speed up. That's naturally how I like to fly, and so you'll find from time to time as I get on these longer straight paths that I tend to speed up. That's not my intention. I am trying to fly a little bit slower. I am flying all these flights in acro mode. Acro mode is the best way to get real stable footage when it comes to HD footage, and I was pretty impressed with the RunCam Split 3 Lite. I think that's going to be a product in micros that we want to use a fair bit. I do some gap shooting. I went through the stools over there, and I actually try to up my game a little later in this cruising flight to go through the next smallest level of the stools. I fail quite a bit, but eventually I do get that, but you get to see some knocks and some bangs. And that's one of the things about doing these HD videos is I try not to use one of my earliest flights because I have found over time that, you know, as the frame takes abuse and we bang things up, maybe screws get a little bit loose, or maybe we end up damaging something, and maybe it doesn't impact flight performance, or maybe it does. So I tend to move towards my later flights in order to show them in review videos, because if I show you just the first pristine flight, that might be unreasonable, that might be very limited, and I would rather you know what it looks like after 15 or 20 crashes, bumps, or what have you. I try to go underneath myself and I don't quite pull it off. After we get out of there, we'll try, I think we try the stool again and just some more close proximity, because what I'm trying to do here is simulate flying these things in smaller spaces. Not everybody has a house like ours. Some people live in apartments or you just have a smaller house, but whatever the space may be, I'm trying to simulate that, how you might fly in a space that's not the size of mine. Of course, I've been flying indoors in acro with all these brushless whoops for a couple years now, so you may find it challenging to do this sort of flight in acro, but it's an awful lot of fun. There we go to the stool failure where I wasn't able to get all the way through. So close. Got to that last stool, the third stool, and I banged into something there. I'm going to try that a few more times. And if you're looking for the flight footage on this particular flight, unfortunately, I did not show my little note before the flight. So I think this is either on the TinyWhoop battery or the G&B 350. You might, or if you already have, want to consider 300 milliamp batteries. I think that might be the best balance between flight time and weight. For those that are rapid fire users, it does run in rapid fire 1. You will see that kind of scrolling mechanism before it locks on, but once it locks on, it does work just fine. That's something else I tested. Also, if you're not a rapid fire owner or user, I flew this also in legacy mode. Of course, the reception wasn't quite as good, to simulate kind of a standard receiver that's not rapid fire. So your FPV view may vary, and you do see that I see that we have some noise getting into the video very much from the ESC. But I wanted to give you an idea of the FPV view, because I do think that the Runcam Split 3 Lite has got the best FPV view of these single camera dual views. We've seen those from Caddx, we've seen those from Runcam. I think Foxeer got in with the mix, but I haven't seen much about that, and I haven't tested that for myself, so I can't really give you any information about that. But I did think that this was pretty good, so I wanted to include FPV view footage from inside and outside. Also, I'll leave a CLI dump down in the video description. Do not fly this under 3 volts, so you need to make sure that you have that OSD element turned on so that you know that you need to land before you get to 3 volts. I tend to land at 3.1 volts, or I come in to land at 3.1 volts. If you fly below 3 volts, you'll find that the board resets and you lose all your beta flight settings. And thus, I've put a CLI of this particular quad down in the video description so you can restore that. You will have to rebind as well. And binding follows the same procedure that you would on the original Mobula 6. Using the same board, it's got a little bind button down there, and you press that when it's got power, and then you do your binding on your radio. It's pretty straightforward, but if you're new, it could be a struggle. Binding is one of those first steps into the orientation of the hobby, to where we don't necessarily know what we need to do, so we have to spend some extra time on it. Of course, there's all sorts of videos on setups and binding with different radios and different protocols on YouTube. I would just search out the model that you're trying to bind and the radio that you're trying to use. But that's a look at our inside FPV view. Let's go outside now. So as we sit here on the table, take note, we have those branches and those leaves on those trees that are moving around. I don't have the weather data, unfortunately. I think it's probably close to what I've flown in the past, somewhere around 10 miles an hour or lower. Of course, it's measured out in the clear and open, and we're in town with houses and fence and trees that can slow that wind down. Also, flying low helps with that as well. This is to demonstrate the video footage, and we do have some sunlight, so that should help to draw out the jello that we might be trying to see. And there is some, if you look in the distance every once in a while, there is a little bit of the side to side is what I see. But overall, I was pretty impressed with the picture. This is at 1080p, so the resolution is 920 by 1080, and it is 60 frames a second. And as we get to the desk, there is a connector on the Runcam Split 3 Lite that you can use to change the settings, but we don't get that in the package. So if you do want to change the settings, then you need to acquire one of those cables if you don't already have one. I did a little full throttle punch. It doesn't have a lot of punch. It's 1S, it's 27 grams. It just doesn't have a lot of punch. You can do flips, you can do rolls. It's going to require a little bit more height. It's not going to be quite as snappy as other machines running multi-cells or bigger props and carrying less weight. But this is about having a very small package and getting HD footage. I did test the Runcam Split 3 Lite and its ability to maintain the recording if you lose power, and it does. So we haven't stepped back in our technology there. I actually just was sitting at the desk after I'd gotten all my footage off, and then it starts recording automatically, so you don't have to hit the button to start the recording. And if you unplug power, you lose the last few seconds. It's not much at all. Also, I kind of ventured outside of the yard just to give us some idea of the range. You probably heard the telemetry warnings on the inside flight. That's fairly common for this board in my house. Outside, I wanted to give you an idea of the control link, and then when we look at the FPV side, you'll get an idea of the video link and how well that works with the VTX. But we've tested these things before. I did a test on my Mobula 6 video where I actually went out and around one of my neighbor's houses. The VTX, when it works normally, it works well. Some people have had issues with the length of the antenna wires on some of these boards, and they've corrected those. That pass I just made before the landing, that's where the wind was starting to push me, and I didn't feel comfortable heading in the direction that I wanted, so I kind of had to steer away from it. And there you see that we had a wind gust come up as we sit there on the patio deck, and the trees were moving pretty briskly. So that gives you an idea of what the wind was like. This is a sample of our FPV view when we're outside, and in my opinion, again, this is much better than other single camera, dual purpose FPV feeds that I've seen. And this is the same flight, I believe, as the others. I should note that I did have 2 SD card ejections during my time flying it. I was able to find one of the SD cards because that was ejected inside. Outside, I still haven't been able to find that SD card. Unfortunately, I think it came from a crash where I did a little punch over the shed, or I got too far over the garage roof, and then I wasn't able to recover quickly enough, and then so I bounced from the garage roof onto the shed, onto the ground, and the SD card is, I assume it's lost. I'm going to continue to look. I'm going to see if I can't get a ladder up there to the garage to take another look at what I can see. Maybe send my 15-year-old up there, maybe have him help me get some young eyes out looking for that tiny little SD card, but my gut tells me it's probably lost. You can see where I have all the elements of the OSD on, so you can get an idea of the throttle use. You get an idea of the RSSI, which is in the top right. I did change the font. I'm using a different font than I usually do, just something I was experimenting with at the time. And when you see me go to that 100% or near 100% throttle, that's where you need to look at the FPV View, because you'll see more of the typical like noise that's getting into the VTX from the electronic components versus VTX breakup. But I was pretty impressed, again, with this FPV View. I think this is better than we've seen in the past. I would also add, for me, I prefer how Runcam does the indicator of that the footage is being recorded with that little red dot. You see it right above the RSSI in the top right-hand corner. I prefer that, but that's very subjective. It could be all over the place. Other companies use different things. Maybe they use the red box with the red letters REC indicating recording. The red dot I find less distracting, but also when I had that card ejection, I did not know the card had ejected till I got the quad in my hands and I could see the card was gone. So when it says no card up there when you have a card ejection, that also isn't as apparent, and it's also not as distracting. Here's a look at the motor. It's a new design. It is a split bell design. You can see that kind of that line between the very top and then the side plates. I bring that up because other motors have had problems with the main bell housing slipping. I did not have those problems. Of course, these are new motors, so we'll have to see as they get into more hands. The top does kind of resemble the Zing motors, at least to me. I don't know if that's inspired by design or otherwise, but I wanted to give you a look at the motor so that you could take a look at what Happy Model will be bringing to the market, which should be available to order now, and I'll have links down in the video description. We should see these stateside. Some of the places you might be on to check for not only the Mobula 6 HD, but also the components that make it up, including the motors. I'm sure Pyrodrone will have them. I'm sure Race Day Quads. We may see them from Get FPV. Good Venture Drones is another place to check out. A number of different vendors will be carrying not only the Mobula 6 HD, but also their components. So I wanted to take a look at the motor because that's one of the things that is new on this quad. So down here on the Split 3 Lite board, We have our connector, which we would use to change the settings. I don't think it's really necessary. It's already set up for 1080p. It's already set up for 60 frames per second. It's already set up to auto record. It doesn't lose the recording, or at least it doesn't lose the entire recording when you lose power without using the button, but the button is right next to it. I can reach that button with my pinky finger if I have enough fingernail. Also, the frame flexes a little bit, so if you have troubles, you could flex the frame a touch in order to press that button if you're someone who likes to use the button. As far as damage goes, I don't have anything to report. When I did my original Mobula 6 review, I did break these two little pieces down here that support the battery. Also, again, note, I used a loom band. I bought a bag on eBay, geez, 2 or 3 years ago. A bag of 500 for probably like $4 or something, and I've still been using the same bag, and I have most of what I originally ordered. These come in real handy in micros for various reasons, but they have these little nice notches over here, and it helps to keep your battery from sliding around, because it will slide around without that rubber band. I always want to keep things secure in there. The frame hasn't taken any damage this time around, and I've been using this frame on various quads for a while now, and it's been tried and true. It's been tested. They do break, especially during the colder weather if you're flying it outside. Plastic doesn't like being really cold, and with enough speed and enough impacts, you will eventually break the frame, but it should be reasonably durable. As you know, many of you have used this frame, many of you have flown the Mobula 6, so I think the frame is pretty tried and true. But in this particular case, because we're running more weight, I just need to report that I didn't have any damage. It's also curious that the canopy design does not have the front post again. I really expected to see video issues with that, but I didn't. Also, the antenna comes out the bottom. I guess you could run it up top, but you want to keep your antennas separated. You don't want to have them right next to each other to make sure you can maintain your best video and control link. While this could be moved around because it is flexible, I don't know where you come up with it, whether if maybe you come up with it over here, because you are going to need access to your SD card. I presume you're going to need access to your SD card if you're recording HD, which seems to be a great part of why you would buy this quad. Also, I had troubles with turtle mode on slick surfaces. I wasn't able to make it turtle on our hardwood floors, which we did have redone about a year and a half ago. So they are pretty fresh hardwood floors, not a lot of grooves or nicks in those for the canopy to catch and allow it to flip over. So that's something else to note. I don't recommend turtle mode in micros. I think you should be using turtle mode when you know it's safe. When you know the props can spin, turtle mode should work just fine and shouldn't damage your board. But if the props have resistance or can't spin, you'll probably find that you'll eventually burn an ESC. And that's not just specific to this particular quad or this board, but in micros in general. Unless you have enough ESC overhead, turtle mode is a risk. I tend to advise to reserve that to a recovery situation. You've landed on your roof, you don't have a ladder to get to it, you're on top of a building, you're stuck in a tree, those situations. Otherwise, it's best to just do the walk of shame, go pick it up, and continue to fly and have fun. The SD card, which is right here, that is manageable with your fingers, but it's not exactly easy. But I kind of feel like I go over these things and I'm explaining something that's obvious, but I try to make everything apparent as I can, as I remember. I know I have been making videos on YouTube for about 4 years now, but I try to remember that I never know who's just starting the hobby versus a lot of you veteran pilots out there. So I try to include little bits of information like that as well. The connector right here connects the recording board to the camera. Let's take the canopy off and take a closer look. Just a quick peek at the Runcam Split 3 Lite. You can see we've got a 3D printed piece that holds the back of the camera to the lens sensor area. Get a close look there at the connector on both sides, the board and the camera side. And then we get to see a little bit of the close-up of all the small electronics on the board for those of you that wanted to see it. One thing to check is your antenna placement. It should be fairly apparent with the canopy even on it, but it should stay away from touching any other components. I believe Patrick J. Clark had an issue with the wire running and touching a couple of other components on the board. It caused video issues. Thankfully, it didn't cause any damage to the components, but it's something to keep track of. You know, don't pull hard on it, but make sure it stays off the lower board and that you're not routing it in some way to where it's touching one or more of the electronic components on either board. And you can see that the TPU, that the mount that they've made for this has been glued onto the lens portion of this component. Over time, will that loosen up or come loose? possibly. I don't know what kind of glue this is. It doesn't feel rock hard. It feels slightly pliable still, but this is here. And also notice the edge profile or the bezel on the camera. I don't even know if it's actually called a bezel, but that's got a really thin bezel around it. We may at some point see an ND filter, or there might be an ND filter out that already works for it. But I really didn't think it was necessary. But those of you that have a very discerning eye may be looking at the video footage in the HD portion and think, well, an ND filter would improve it. Let me measure the lens so you get an idea. So it looks like it's 13 millimeters in diameter. Gonna put this little guy back together and we'll finish up. The last thing I'd like to note is there's very limited camera protection, and that's not unusual when it comes to HD and micros. The field of view needs to be so wide in order to make it that good immersive footage that you can't get much camera protection without getting it in your view. So in this particular case, there's very little, but I had a number of different crashes. You saw me hit it into the stools a few times. I don't have any damage on my camera. It still works fine to this day. If you should want to take a look at the specs, the beauty pictures, the pricing should come in between $120 and $135, depending upon which receiver you choose. There are receivers of various sorts. We have FR Sky, which is the case of the one I'm using, as well as DSMX, which I think will have a separate receiver. It won't be the all-in-one board. Fly Sky, and it also has Crossfire available. So the FR Sky version I see right now, it's coming in at $119 off on the Banggood website. If you move to the TBS Crossfire version, that comes in at $135. There's of course an additional pictures. You can compare the scale, the weights, things of that nature. I'll put links to all the vendors who are selling this as they become available. And if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in that section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.